I'd like to ask you, can you recognize the lyrics to this song? And for old long past my joy, for old long ago, we will take a cup of kindness yet, for old long ago. Do you recognize those lyrics? Well, of course, it's Auld Lang Syne, written by Robert Burns in the 1700s. I open up today's episode, Compassion Connections, produced by Compassion Care Hospice, because we are now in the holiday season. And this episode I am titling Poignant Memories of Past Holidays. Because all of us have these incredible, wonderful memories of sharing the holidays, and especially major holidays like Thanksgiving and Christmas, with loved ones. And for many of us, those loved ones are no longer here. But there is a way, there's a means, there's a path, there's a journey to recapturing those memories and making them poignant. So what I want to do today is a little different than all of our other episodes. In past episodes, I've always had guests in the studio, and we've shared stories, and I've asked them questions, and they've given very profound answers. But what I want to do today is to give 3 stories that have affected me because I was involved. I was involved in these stories in different hospices because I've worked in different hospices, 2 adult hospices, a pediatric hospice. So I'm going to tell 3 stories that transformed me during the holidays because these particular incidents, situations, activities took place during the holiday season with 3 patients in 3 different hospices. The only thing I'm going to do is to change the names, though the caregivers know full well that I've been talking and sharing these stories and around the world, actually, in my workshops and speeches. But still, I'm going to use a different name for each of the characters. So, may I begin with this appreciation of life, because that's what hospice really is all about. Hospice isn't about dying and death, per se. It's about appreciating. It's about finding meaningfulness in life. It's about helping our patients at Compassion Care Hospice and any hospice around the world, helping them, our patients, to be validated. And this is what it's all about, validating, getting them to appreciate the good in life that they shared. And now, especially during the holiday season, for the caregivers, the family members who loved someone who was very special to them and who were engaged in that final journey through life. Okay, so here we go. Story number 1. So in hospices, there is what we call an IDG meeting, where the doctors, the nurses, the social workers, the bereavement specialist, the volunteer coordinator, the administrators, the chaplains, we all meet once a week and go over every patient. And by the way, that is, if you come into hospice, that's the team that you will get. So anyway, one day, years ago, it was towards Thanksgiving, and we were having the IDG meeting, and a nurse came to me and said, one of our patients wants to meet you. And I said, oh, why? And said, because he saw you on television and he wants you to come to his house. I said, well, okay. She said, but he's very angry at life. He is very angry that his wife passed away a year ago. He's very angry that he's all alone in the house. So you have to be aware that he's a very angry man. I thought, okay, I've dealt with anger in life. So I went. I knocked on the door, and we'll say his name is Harold. And Harold said, "Who the heck are you?" Only he used different language. And I said, "Well, I'm Joseph. You invited me here." He said, "Get your blankety blank in here." I thought, "Oy, oy, oy." So we sit down and I say, "How are you?" And he gives me this radamatole, how horrible life is. And I'm asking him questions and doesn't want to answer. He just wants to complain about everything in the world. So I said, "Well, you invited me here because you saw me on television. So what can I do for you?" He said, "Come with me in the garage." I thought, "Oh, okay." So we went in the garage and he said, "Look up there. There's a big trunk. Get that trunk down here." I said, "Oh, yeah, yeah." So I climb the ladder. Hopefully I don't break my neck. I get the trunk down there. He says, "Open it up." And so I open it up and there's these pictures, these black and white pictures of all these great movie stars, all these great singers from the past, all these great politicians, all these great leaders, including world leaders. And I said, "What is this?" He said, "That's my life. I was a bodyguard. I was a bodyguard to this big famous movie star and this big famous singer and this big famous television person. That's me at the United Nations protecting one of the world leaders. That's me with the first lady." I thought, "Oh my God, that's incredible. What a gorgeous life you've had." He said, "Nobody cares. Nobody cares." I said, "Well, there must be somebody that cares." He said, "I want you to put me on television and I can tell my stories." I said, "Well, that's a little bit difficult. And the agenda for my television series is full for 6 months. But let me see what I can do." And I walked out thinking, what could I possibly do? Well, before I could even make a choice, he called me and he said, "I saw you on TV again, and you were talking about teaching children and teenagers history. I want to teach them too by my life story." I thought, "Oh, good Lord." And he only had a couple of family members left, and they were traveling, living around the world, and he was all alone. And so I called the school district. I got permission from hospice, and from him. I had to get his permission, of course. And I called a history teacher I knew. And we decided to bring some students into his house so he could talk to them about history in the entertainment world, in the political world, in the governmental world. And I thought he could be validated. So that started. So once a week, we had a volunteer at hospice who came with me, and we would bring like 5 students at a time from high school. So he was mesmerizing. They loved him. So one day I'm at the TV studio and I'm getting ready to do an interview with the senator, and he comes in. And I said, "What are you doing here? You're not allowed to drive. Your driver's license has been revoked. Where's your oxygen machine?" "Oh my gosh." He said, "I need you to find me a photographer. I need 8x10 glossy black and white pictures. These kids want my autograph." So I did it and I called hospice and they took him back home, wouldn't let him drive. And then I drove his car home. So anyway, the newspapers picked up on it and they did a story on him in the newspaper. Somebody from his high school, like, I don't know, 60 years ago, saw it. And the high school called him and said, "We want you to come back to the school for a big event." He said, "What event?" They said, "The Herald event. We're putting you in the Hall of Fame in our high school." Oh my gosh, he was so excited. Well, oh my gosh, one of his children flew in from somewhere else, went shopping for a new suit, drove him to another state with his oxygen while he's in hospice. They had a big ceremony honoring Harold. And guess what? 3 days later, he passed away. It was just so beautiful. This was happening during the Thanksgiving season. So Harold was honored. Harold was validated by hospice. Now, I'll tell you a second story. And this combines the mystical with the practical. I always say that the reason I have 2 eyes is, one, I see everything in life through the practicality, and the other eye, everything from the mystical, because I think they go together. And that's what hospice is about, too. Hospice is about finding, discovering oneself towards the end of life and validating again, appreciating. What a beautiful word. Sometimes we forget how to appreciate, as the lyrics in that song goes, long ago, long ago. Okay, so we're going to pretend her name is Sheila. So one day at an IDG meeting, and remember I said an IDG meeting is when the whole team of hospice, and when you become a patient in hospice, you get the doctor, the nurse, the administrators, the certified nursing assistant, the chaplain, the bereavement specialist, the volunteer coordinator who brings volunteers to help the caregivers and the patients. You get this team. So once again, we meet every week and discuss every patient. So I had a social worker come to me and say, I think we picked the name Sheila, right? That Sheila saw you on television where you mentioned that you grew up as a professional dancer in New York, in London, in Los Angeles, San Francisco. And she wants to meet you because when she was young, and she's like in her late 80s now, she was a rockette in New York at the Radio City Music Hall. And she wants to meet you. So I went, and there was just a strange energy because one of her relatives was there, and that relative refused to talk to me. And I was told that I was not allowed to use the word death. So, Sheila, we didn't talk about dying. We sat at the dining room table, and she pulled out her scrapbook, and we were going through pictures of her as a dancer, and I was telling stories about my life as a dancer. But her relative was just glaring at me. So when we were going through modern day pictures, there was a young, beautiful young man, teenager, in a different race. He was of a complete different race. And it was intriguing. And so I said to Sheila, who is this handsome young man? And the relative just stiffened and stared at me and stormed out of the dining room. And Sheila said, oh, we're not allowed to talk about him. That was my grandson, and he committed suicide a year ago. And that person in the dining room is the parent. Okay. So I didn't ask any questions. We went back to talking about dancing. So then a week later, she called and said, can you come back? I have more pictures to share with you. So I said, okay. So we went back and shared more pictures about her life as a wife, as a mother, grandmother, and how she missed dancing and all of this. And the doorbell rang. And I said, oh, I'll get it. And there was a gentleman that answered the door, and he said, who are you? And I said, well, I'm from such and such hospice. And I said, who may I ask are you? And he said, I'm the old blankety blank blank son. We haven't talked in 20 years, but I heard through the grapevine that she kicked a bucket. And I said, well, actually, she's sitting in the dining room. Would you like to come in and be reunited? He said, no, here's my card. Just call me when the old blankety blank blank dies. So when I went back into the dining room, Sheila said to me, who was that? Well, I wasn't going to lie. But at the same time, I wasn't going to tell her, that was your son that you haven't talked to in 20 years. So I just said, oh, it's religious missionaries, and they came to convert us. She said, well, I don't believe in any of that stuff. I said, you know what? Let's talk for a second. What do you want people to remember you by? She said, I don't want anybody to remember me. I said, oh, no, look, I'm remembering you. What do you want people to remember you by? She said, I'd like to be remembered as a beautiful young dancer. I said, okay, well, can we talk about this at your funeral? She said, there'll be no funeral, no memorial service. I don't believe in anything. I said, okay. So we went back to talking about dancing. And I said, there are a lot of people out there that don't know about your life in dancing. So how about we do this? Why don't we plan a living memorial service that before you pass away, we can have a big memorial service and you can be there and we can talk about your dancing and you can show people your clips and your photographs and people can bring food. She said, yes, that would be great. But there's one condition. I said, what? She said, you have to dance. I said, that's not my job in hospice. She said, oh, yes, it is, because I saw you do a theater show about hospice and you brought dancers and you were dancing and I saw it on television. I said, okay, I'll dance, but let's organize this. But her relative who she lived with, I'll say, was very particular about this, but helped. So it's the day of the living memorial service. There's about 40 people there. There's tons of food, and it's it's well, it's during the holiday season. So there were Halloween decorations, there were Thanksgiving decorations, there were Christmas decorations, and there was no place for me to dance except in the garden. And I danced barefoot. So we talked about her as a dancer, and people were saying, oh, I didn't know this. I didn't know that. Why didn't you tell me? Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. So then after everybody finished eating, it was like, Joseph's going to dance now in honor of Sheila's career as a dancer. And I took off my shoes, and I had brought two musicians, and actually three I brought. And we set up in the garden, and there's a bare spot of just dirt. And the music starts, and I'm dancing away, twirling, twirling, twirling. My eyes closed. I'm just twirling all over the place. I'm this, that, this, and that, this, and that. It's a combination of flamenco. It's a combination of Middle Eastern dancing, a combination of jazz, folk dancing, but I'm going wild. And so it's over, and people clap. And I say, this was in honor of Sheila being a rocket. And everybody clapped for her. Well, she took me aside and she said, come in the living room with me. Now, you're not going to believe this, but this is true. So we went in the living room. We left the guests there. And she said, did you notice something when you were dancing? And I said, no, I had most of the time my eyes closed. She said, you need to tell me if I'm hallucinating or if it's the medicine the nurse gives me. And I said, tell me what you saw. She said, I saw my grandson standing in the garden with you. And he was a dancer. And I saw him dancing with you. Even though he died a year ago, I think that was his spirit. And I don't believe in the afterlife. Tell me, is it the medicine? I said, I can't tell you anything. I didn't see. So we finished. I said, I'll come back and see you next week, and we'll talk more about your life as a dancer and my life as a dancer. I lie to you not. That night she died. The next day, her relative called me up and said, could you please come over here? I said, yes, I will. I went because in hospice, you get 13 months of free counseling, guidance if you're the caregiver of a loved one who died in hospice. She said, I want to show you something. She turned on the TV and she said, I filmed you dancing. See that behind you? Well, who do you think that is? What do you think that is? I said, I don't know. She said, that's my son. He was there. And I said, did you show this to your mom? And she said, no. And so I told her what her mom said. I left and I never heard from them again. But I share that story because it's about the mystical and practical aspects of life and death, about what hospice can do in the way of validating people on their life journey, validating. I'm going to keep bringing that word up, validating, appreciating, as that lyric of the song went. And for old long past my joy, for old long ago, we will take a cup of kindness, yes, for old long ago. Okay, last story. I had a patient who was 14 years old. Now, he asked me to tell everybody his story, but I'm still going to change the name. So we'll say his name is Peter. Peter had a rare disease called EB, epidermolysis bullosa. It is a very rare disease, but it's basically you are born without the ability to keep your skin on. It's really, we call them the butterfly kids because their skin is so fragile. They are bandaged from head to toe. They have operations right and left. A piece of skin will fall off. Anyway, eventually he had had enough. I think he had 30 surgeries and he was 14 years old and just couldn't handle it anymore. Being bathed every day in saline, wrapped in white bandages, and then taken off. And so, anyway, he asked to go to hospice. And I lived about 75 miles away from where he lived, and I would drive to go see him. And one day I got very angry because even though the high school students meant well, what they had done is they had come in with the school's permission and they made a video of him in his underpants where you could see all the parts of his body that had no skin. And he said to me, "This is how I'm going to be remembered." Well, I was upset. And he was a beautiful artist. Oh my gosh, he could draw. So I had the TV station here. And so I arranged for his family and him to come up here to our town. And a hotel here put them up in the presidential suite. I brought him to the TV studio and had an audience, but the audience were all artists. And I interviewed him on television, not as a young man with an incurable disease, not as a young man in hospice, but as an artist, because I was going to change his identity. Because I'm going to tell you this. Children who are terminally ill are not afraid of dying like adults. They don't have regrets like adults. What they are afraid of is being forgotten. So we changed that. We made a television show of him as an artist. Then we started doing artwork, and we entered them in his county fair, and he started winning gold medals, blue ribbons. And then I started sending it to movie stars that he adored. And some of the movie stars, yes, they wanted $25 for a picture. We forgot about them. But he wanted to go to Disneyland to see his famous movie star that was going to be there. But we couldn't, of course, at the time. And the movie star started sending him notes and letters. So one day, it was Halloween, his physician said to him, "Peter, I think you've stopped declining. We expected you to pass away months ago, and this is Halloween and Thanksgiving and Christmas, and you're going to be around." He said, "Oh, darn." And she said, "What do you mean, oh, darn?" He said, "I have to wear bandages my whole body. And when I go to the grocery store, people run." He said, "And my poor mother. So, you know what? I'm just going to go trick-or-treating as a mummy." Oh, we laughed. Then he said, "I want to go to Make-A-Wish." "So what was your Make-A-Wish?" He said, "I want to go to Disneyland." And his mother said, yeah, people are going to have a rough time. And he said, "Oh, no, we'll get into rides free. The minute we show up in line, people are going to think, oh, I'm going to go get a hot dog. I'm going to go get popcorn." Oh, he just had the best sense of humor. So one night, on a Friday night, I said, "It's time we plan your memorial service." And he said, "Well, let's plan yours first because you have to drive 75 miles home in the dark through the mountains. Let's plan yours first." So we planned my memorial service, and then we planned his as we ate pizza. What he wanted 600 people at his memorial service. And he wanted his dog there. And the dog was on his lap when he died. And nobody was allowed to wear black, but we couldn't tell people that. But anybody who wore black had to come in, and they had to wear the, like the Groucho Marx glasses and mustache. And he wanted everything pink. Pink fruit, pink cotton candy, pink balloons. Okay, it's time for the memorial service. And people were sitting there because they wore black, and because we didn't tell them they couldn't. And they're sitting there with Groucho Marx mask and glasses, holding pink balloons. And when we put his life story up on the big screen to validate this precious young man at the age of 15, the dog who was in the back ran up the aisle and started trying to scratch this big screen, and people were crying. He was my hero. And we validated him as an artist, not as a dying boy with a rare disease. People, and you know what? We kept a roster. He wanted 600 people at his memorial service. We had 626 come, and everyone had to bring a stuffed animal, and we gave it and distributed the stuffed animals to kids in foster care. This is what I mean by looking at people and appreciating them, those poignant moments. So if you have lost someone this year, last year, 10 years ago, and you're struggling through the holiday season, look back at all of those moments that were poignant, that were beautiful, and validate that loved one and validate yourself. And if you are a patient in hospice now, or you are a loved one, a caregiver, make this a joyful holiday season, a thankful holiday season, a merry holiday season with your loved one in hospice by validating them and appreciating. And here's what you appreciate. What went on in life journey? What have you had? What do you have now? And as a caregiver, what will you be able to appreciate in the future? One last thing, and I'm not doing this as a promotion. I spend a lot of time at Compassion Care Hospice in memory care facilities, and we use puppets. I'll give you a little story, real brief one. There was a resident patient, and I had a puppet behind my back. And I said to her, "What's your name?" And my name's Joseph. And she said, "Oh, what a pretty name." I said, "But I'll bet you have a pretty name too." And she could not remember her name. She had dementia, could not remember her name. So I pulled out the puppet, and it was a squirrel. And I said, "Hi, I'm Squirrely Squirrel. What's your name?" And she said, "Eleanor. And when I go this blah, 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 blah. When I was a little girl, my daddy and I used to go hiking. And we'd look for squirrels." I made up that name. So I recently, because I care so much about the people in dementia, I have an audio book. It's only 18 minutes long. It's for children who have a grandma or grandpa in hospice, grandma and grandpa who have dementia. It's called The Magical Holiday Puppets and Grandma's Memories. Here's the little synopsis. When 10-year-old Abigail becomes enchanted by a puppet show featuring Halloween, Thanksgiving, and Christmas, an idea sparks in her heart. What if holiday puppets could help Grandma Lottie remember the special holidays she once loved to celebrate? And here's a secret. The character was named Grandma Lottie because my grandma's name was Lottie, and she was my saint. She was my angel, and I validate her every day, but especially during the holidays. So if you'd like to listen to that 18-minute audio, and it's recorded by a professional child actress in Los Angeles, you can go to YouTube and then just type in Galata Puppets channel. Galata Puppets channel. No money, just read it. Listen to it. Galata Puppets channel. And hopefully, if you have a child that you know of whose grandma and grandpa have dementia or a hospice patient, let them listen to it. And maybe they'll go out and buy some puppets. Anyway, I wish everyone a happy, happy, happy holiday and appreciation of life. Just a major appreciation of life. And if you would like to contact me, perhaps share stories with me, perhaps become a volunteer in hospice, or if you have a loved one that you're questioning, does he or she need hospice, get hold of me through Compassion Care Hospice in Reno, Nevada. Compassion Care Hospice in Reno, Nevada. It's a wonderful place of service.